I'm glad to say he's going to be joining us every Wednesday night, as long as this emergency lasts, Scott. But that might be a long time, mightn't it?
Well, unfortunately, yes. We don't see any pathway to peace. Logic dictates that there's many pathways to peace, but we seem to be in a world where illogic reigns supreme. Not just illogic. We live in a world where normal standards no longer apply. Moral compasses, the differences between right and wrong. You and I are of the same generation, and I listened to your outstanding monologue, and why I don't understand how people who have been put in a position of responsibility don't share your horror at what's happened. It doesn't matter where you stand on an issue politically. It matters where you stand on determining right versus wrong. There is no circumstance under which you can justify taking innocent civilians and medical staff out of a hospital, tie their hands behind their back, and execute them. There's no scenario whatsoever that can be painted as something that is justifiable. It must be condemned from the bottom of your heart, from the bottom of your soul. There's also no world in which we can justify continuing to fund a war that has already cost a nation we proclaim as our friend, Ukraine, 500,000 lives. What friend allows a friend to be led down the road to slaughter? It's not a friend indeed. And I think we're seeing that the United Kingdom, the United States, and all of these European democracies that proclaim to be the epitome of, moral certitude stand for nothing. We are actually the opposite of what we proclaim. We have become the living manifestation of evil on this earth. And I don't say that easily because I am an American. I'm a proud American. I love my country. I love what we claim to stand for. And I am deeply saddened to see the United States and our mentor, the United Kingdom, headed down the path they currently are.
I'm into all that. Just as a sidebar, if you like, whilst it's true that little Schultz and little Macron and the other European midgets are going along with all of this, there is no doubt that it's an Anglo-Saxon driven affair, is it? What is peculiar about us that we love war, unjust war? How did we get here? We were once allies of the Soviet Union to crush fascism. Now we're funding fascism. How did we get here, Scott?
Well, not to insult the British people, but I think we understand that during the Second World War, it was still the British Empire. And while Winston Churchill was absolutely heroic when he said he would fight them on the beaches and fight them in the towns and defeat the Nazi, the enemy, at the end of the day, he was defending empire, the British Empire, which committed many, many sins in the name of empire. And after the United States sought to dismantle the British Empire and the French Empire and the Dutch Empire, we replaced it with an American empire. And that's where we are today. We're committing the sins of empire. The British, we flipped the roles. America used to be a colony of the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Today, the British people are, you are a colony of the United States. You can't exist without us. You are nothing without us. You stand for nothing. You've allowed yourself to be so deeply subordinated to us that you are, in fact, one and the same, except you're not, because we don't view you as equals. To us, you're simply a colony that we will use and then dispose of, just like we're disposing of Ukraine, just like we'll dispose of everybody else. But this is about American empire. This is about sustaining American empire. And we treat the British like we treat the French, like we treat the Germans, like we treat everybody in Europe as subordinates who are there to do our bidding. We have basically put the French and the Germans in an untenable situation. They've been locked into bad policy. They have no other options, just like the British have no other options. I mean, they do. They could listen to you, but that's right now. That seems unlikely. The way your government has been created, the political and economic elites that back your government and my government, it's the same. It's all about money, the corruption of money, the corruption of power. We allow the lure of big homes, big cars, big bank accounts to cause us to turn a blind eye to what really matters, which is human beings, the human dignity, and an absolute necessity for us to run to the aid of humans who are suffering, but we're ignoring them. We've stifled their shouts. We've turned a blind eye to the horrific images that are coming out. I don't know, George. I'm as befuddled as you are on this one. It is deeply, deeply troubling and deeply disturbing.
Now let's start with Ukraine, if we may, Scott. You saw all the Ukrainian flags flying in the American Congress. The America Firsters put Ukraine first, and Israel first, and Taiwan first, and they robbed the American workers of their tax money and sent it to doomed wars and cheered about it and imagined that that would be a good look as they waved another country's flag on the floor of the United States Congress, waving goodbye to the best part of $100 billion extra dollars sent to these wars. How did you see it?
Well, I mean, just that. This is the people's house. The United States Congress is sacred to the American people. It's the home of the implementation of the Constitution of the United States, that document that defines who we are and what we are as a people. It sets forth the principles and values of a nation. And so one would hope that when the American people elect a representative to go to the people's house, to the United States Congress, that they would behave accordingly. The sight of an American congressional representative waving the flag of Ukraine. And the reason why I raise my voice here is, it's one thing to say that we are allies. I could imagine if, the British royalty or a British senior politician visit the United States, that maybe as a sign of solidarity, we would wave the Union Jack and say, hey, welcome to America. But that wasn't, this was a celebration of the subordination of everything America stands for a nation that represents none of the values that we aspire to. Ukraine is not a democracy. I hope everybody understands that. On May 20th, the incumbent president, Zelensky, his term expires. There was no presidential election this year, although the Constitution of Ukraine mandates one. He claims he hides behind the specter of war. The last I checked, the United States held presidential elections during the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln defeated George McClellan. During the Second World War, Franklin Delano Roosevelt won an unprecedented fourth term. And I do believe that we were still in a state of war with Japan when Potsdam went down and Winston Churchill was sent home for losing an election. Elections take place in democracies, and we don't allow conflicts to stop it. In fact, if there's a war, that's all the more reason for there to be an election, because the people's voice must be heard. But in Ukraine, the peaceful voice has been silenced, replaced instead by this hateful ideology that links itself to the most odious person, one of the most odious people in modern history, Stepan Bandera, the progeny of Adolf Hitler, a man whose organization murdered Jews, murdered Russians, murdered anybody they deemed to be lesser people. This is a white supremacist government that is engaged in horrific crimes against humanity as we speak, and they have been robbing the American public, robbing the European public blind in a war that has nothing to do, and this is the irony of it all. This conflict has never been about preserving Ukraine. This conflict has always been about sacrifice in Ukraine. And that is the epitome of the sickness of the Ukrainian people, that they can't recognize this. They were never going to win this war. No one ever believed they were going to win this war. The sole purpose of this conflict was to bring harm to the Russian people, to the Russian nation, sacrificing Ukraine in the vain hope that Russia would be so wounded by this conflict that there would be domestic political unrest that could bring down the government of Vladimir Putin. That is a forlorn dream. It's not going to happen. Vladimir Putin is strong. He has just been reelected. Imagine that, reelected. We call Russia a dictatorship. They held a democratic election, and the results are in. Vladimir Putin has been certified as the democratically elected president of Russia, unlike Zelensky. No, the Ukrainian people are dying by the droves. Look, the foreign minister of Ukraine, Kuleba, said it best. I think he finally had a wake-up call. He said there's no amount of military aid that could be sent to Ukraine at this juncture to reverse the tide of battle on the battlefield. The Russian advance cannot be stopped.
There's some graphics today in the British press, Scott, which say that these graphics represent Russia's summer offensive. Are you expecting an offensive, or will it be this steady incremental attrition that they've been following now very successfully over the last period? You expecting a big sweep?
The big sweep is happening as we speak. I mean, the nature of war. I've spoken with senior Russian generals who have all said the same thing. For those who are expecting big arrow offenses out of the Second World War, that's not how war is fought nowadays. The weaponry, the lethality of conflict is not conducive to that kind of action. You'll suffer too many casualties. Even a losing army like the Ukrainians, when equipped with the proper weaponry, can be very deadly. I remind everybody that the most deadly month of the war in World War II for the United States Army in Europe wasn't D-Day, wasn't June, it wasn't the Battle of the Bulge in December. It was April 1945, the last full month of the war. More Americans died fighting a defeated German army because the German army was fighting for its life. Ukrainians are still a very deadly military force. The Russians know this. They're treating them with respect. I have yet to meet a Russian officer, a Russian soldier who has fought the Ukrainians, who has anything bad to say about the Ukrainians as military professionals. They all say that these are extremely tough troops, extremely brave troops who fight to the last bullet. They don't yield, they don't retreat, they don't surrender in general. And so the Russians respect this. I do see the Russians increasing the pressure on the line, and I do see them being prepared to take advantage of gaps as they develop in the line. But right now, what the Russians are doing is what they're going to do, maybe on a bigger scale, but it's basically putting pressure along the entire line of contact, waiting for the Ukrainians to break.
Now, in the time left, let's turn, if we can, to the Middle East, to the wider Middle East, because I want to ask you about Iran. Now that the dust has settled, presumably, and that tit and tat have been traded, and it's unlikely, at this stage at least, that there'll be a direct all-out war between Israel and Iran. How do you see the new balance of power?
I see that strategic deterrence has shifted in favor of Iran. Prior to the Iranian attack, Israel assumed, rightfully so, based upon the events, that they held deterrence supremacy. What that means is that Israel could do pretty much anything it wanted to and not fear the consequences of their actions. That most nations, including Iran, were intimidated by the potential of an Israeli retaliation so as not to strike Israel directly. But the attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus was a bridge too far, so to speak, and the Iranians had to respond, and they did. And the way they responded was masterful, because they sent a signal to not just Israel, but the United States and the entire world, especially the part of the world that believes in an American ballistic missile defense shield as being a viable defense against modern ballistic missiles, that there is no safe place in the world today. that the Iranians proved that they can reach out and touch any place in Israel anytime they want to with sufficient force to destroy it. The fact that Iran didn't do that is testament to the wisdom of their strategy, which was to demonstrate potential, not reality. And the Israeli response was so weak as to be a joke, but that proves that the Israelis understood very well where they were. The Israelis did not strike back with anything meaningful. It was a token response because the Israelis knew had they responded forcefully, they would have been swamped by Iranian missiles. Now we have the Iranians, I think, behaving responsibly. You have the supreme leader who just doesn't want to go in the business of publicly calling out the Israelis, publicly shaming them. He says that's the past. We don't need to discuss this because neither side wants this to turn into a broader war. It doesn't matter how many Iranian missiles can strike Israel. At the end of the day, a broader Middle East war would be a disaster for everybody involved, including Iran.
And lastly, Shifa, the bombardment has continued, Rafah, the bombardment has continued day and night from the air, but Israel has now moved tanks and bulldozers and have constructed tents for people that presumably will soon be fleeing from Rafah under savage bombardment. Are you expecting actually a ground invasion of Rafah, and what would that look like?
We just spoke about deterrence, and the key thing to deterrence is when you have effective deterrence when the side that you're dealing with understands that an action they take will generate a reaction that far outweighs the benefit they get from the action. The United States, Egypt, Jordan, and other regional nations have told the Israelis that they will not tolerate an offensive in Rafah, that there will be consequences. But they don't have deterrent superiority over the Israelis. The Israelis are not afraid of them. The Israelis aren't intimidated by the potential response because they don't believe these nations have what it takes to do what Iran did, strike Israel, hold Israel accountable. And until Israel is convinced that if they move on Rafah, that the consequences will be overwhelmingly disastrous for them, they're going to move on Rafah. And they're going to move on Rafah in the way that the Israeli military knows how to do, with absolute indifference to the suffering, death, pain of the Palestinian civilians involved. They will bomb them, they will kill them, they will snipe them, they will machine gun them, they will drive them out of wherever they are today into refugee camps where they will starve them. They will allow them to be thirsty. They will deny them medical attention because to the Israelis, they are human animals. The Palestinian people are human animals. The Israelis have said that from the very top to the very bottom. Amalek is not a theory, it is reality. The Israelis don't view the Palestinians as people, and they are treating them as less than sheep. At least a sheep has value. To the Israelis, these Palestinians, they have no value. Their life is nothing. We saw that. They tied the hands of children behind their backs before they shot them. These aren't humans, the Israelis. They've become something different. They've become as inhuman as the Nazis who used to tie the hands of Jewish children behind their backs before they shot them.
Wow. Scott, thanks for doing this, and thank you in advance for coming back next Wednesday for the Ultimate War Reports. And sadly, more than one war needs reporting. Scott Ritter, the authority, the inspector. Follow him on all his social media portals. Listen to him. He knows what he's talking about.